You know, they say a country's trade is kind of like a mirror reflecting its economy. Well, today we're looking into that mirror and we're focusing on one of the most vital sectors of India's economy, agriculture. We're going to break down what India sells, what it buys, and what the final balance sheet really tells us. So let's dive right in.
So, what's the bottom line here? When it comes to agricultural trade, is India in the black or in the red? Is the country earning more from its fields than it's spending on its global grocery bill? That's really the core question we're trying to answer today.
And we're not just taking a quick snapshot. Nope, we're digging into a full 13-year period, from 2009 all the way to 2022, and we're using data from an analysis by Purna Gautam Tiwari. This longer view lets us see the real trends that are shaping India's agricultural trade over time.
Okay, first up, let's talk about what India is selling to the rest of the world. This is the export story.
And get this. By the 2021-22 financial year, India's agricultural exports hit a massive 2.76 trillion rupees. That's just a huge number, and it really showcases India's role as a major global food supplier.
The scale of this growth is pretty incredible. If you go back to 2009, exports were just under 700 billion rupees. Fast forward 13 years, and that figure has nearly quadrupled. This really shows you just how much India's footprint in the global food market has expanded.
So you have to wonder, what's driving this incredible growth? Which products are the real star performers in India's export basket? Let's break it down.
A few key products are really doing the heavy lifting here. Rice is the undisputed champion, making up over a quarter of all agricultural exports. That's followed by marine products, then meat, dairy, and poultry. And of course, spices. Now get this, just these four categories together account for almost 70% of India's entire agricultural export value.
But here's where the story gets a little more complex. While the overall picture looks rosy, if you dig a little deeper, you'll find that not every single commodity is thriving. In fact, some of India's traditional export powerhouses are actually losing ground.
Yeah, the landscape is definitely shifting. For instance, oil meals have plummeted from over 11% of the export basket all the way down to less than 3%. And you see a similar story with tea and cashew, which have seen their shares cut by half or even more. This just goes to show how dynamic and how quickly this export portfolio is changing.
All right, let's flip the coin and look at the other side of the equation. Imports. What's on India's global shopping list? And believe me, the import story is just as dramatic as the export one.
In 2021-22, India spent over 2 trillion rupees on agricultural imports. Now, while that's less than what it earned from exports, it is still a huge amount of money.
And just like with exports, the growth in imports has been dramatic. We're talking about going from around 435 billion rupees back in 2009 to an import bill that has shot up by nearly 5 times. This really shows that as India's economy has grown, so has its appetite for agricultural products from around the world.
But here's where it gets really interesting. When we look at what India is importing, the story becomes incredibly focused. This is not a diverse shopping cart. Not at all. One single category absolutely dominates the entire import bill.
And there it is, vegetable oil. It accounts for a staggering 67.6%. That's more than 2/3 of India's total agricultural imports. I mean, nothing else even comes close. This heavy reliance on a single commodity makes the country's food budget really vulnerable to things like global price shocks and supply chain disruptions. It's honestly one of the most striking findings in all the data.
Okay, so we've seen the export boom, and we've seen the import surge. Now it's time to bring them both together and balance the scales. What does the final tally really look like?
So the good news is that India does have a positive trade balance in agriculture. It sells more than it buys. That surplus was nearly 667 billion rupees in 2022. But, and this is important, this surplus has been volatile. It actually peaked back in 2013-14 at over 1 trillion rupees, and it has come down since then. That tells us the gap between exports and imports is tightening.
And this is where we find the crucial point. It's all in the compound annual growth rate, or CAGR. That's basically the average growth rate each year. And over this 13-year period, agricultural imports have grown at an average rate of 12% per year, while exports have grown at 11%. Now that sounds like a tiny difference, but it's really significant. It tells us that imports are growing just a little bit faster than exports, and that's the reason why that trade surplus has been shrinking from its peak.
So, given all this data, what's the path forward? Well, the study proposes a very clear direction for policy, aiming for a stronger, more sustainable future for agricultural trade.
The author's core recommendation is clear. India needs a viable and predictable agriculture export policy. But the key phrase here is a farmer-centric approach. The focus has to be on benefiting the producers, the farmers, directly.
So what does a farmer-centric policy actually look like? According to the source, it really stands on three key pillars. First, you have to always ensure domestic food security. Second, you need to create a stable and friendly environment for exporters. And third, you have to provide a major push to the food processing and manufacturing sectors, to add value to raw products before they're sold.
Which leaves us with a final, pretty powerful question. The data shows that India is a critical player in the global food market, but it also highlights these big challenges, like import dependencies and a tightening trade balance. So, can a renewed, farmer-focused policy strike the right balance? Can it empower farmers to secure India's food needs and strengthen their position on the world stage? Well, that is the challenge ahead.